Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, Art Basel Conversations. My name is Mary Spirito. I'm the Curator of Conversations, and I do this work with my colleague Annalie Graf, who's also here today. This is a very special artist talk. We're honored to have you here. Lynn Hershman Leeson, who is an artist based in San Francisco, speaking with Sabine Himmelsbach, director of the House of Electronic Arts here in Basel, where Lynn has a major exhibition, speaking with our great colleague, Dr. Maxa Zoller, who's curator of Art Basel's film sector, also running now. I recommend you to check that out. And thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming all three of them.
Welcome, everyone. Is this on? Yes. Can you hear me? I'm supposed to hold it close to my mouth. There you go. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Very pleased to see you all here. I'm extremely happy to have Lynn Hershman Leeson here in discussion with you, with me, and with Sabine Himmelsbach. If you haven't seen the exhibition Antibodies in House of the Electronic Arts, I really recommend you go and see this mind-blowing event. I will not say much in the beginning in order to introduce you to the connection between the exhibition and the films we are showing at Art Basel. We decided to present you a very, very short clip of Lynn's film Conceiving Ardor. And then Sabine will introduce the exhibition to you, and we'll try and create a kind of network of parallel ideas within and from Lynn's early to her very, very recent work. So could we dim the light and just have the first clip, please?
The redeeming gift of humanity is the ability of each generation to recreate itself.
Yeah, we'll have it again, because it's so short.
The redeeming gift of humanity is the ability of each generation to recreate itself.
So the redeeming gift of humanity is the gift of...
The redeeming gift of humanity is the ability of each generation to recreate itself.
And this is Tilda Swinton playing Ada Lovelace, the 19th century mathematician who wrote the first computer program, who wrote language, computer language. We showed this film yesterday because it started a trilogy of feature film works that Lynn is hoping to complete in the next year. In this work, she was looking at the relationship between the 19th century and the present in the following Techno-Lust, which also starred Tilda Swinton. It was more about, I said a sci-fi, and I was immediately corrected that's a true sci, because it's based on true facts. And the next work will be done, is in production right now. So maybe we could pass the mic to Sabine and show the clips. I'll start the clips of the exhibition right here, and maybe you could sort of also introduce the audience to some of the links between what Ada was saying, the recreation of each generation and the exhibition.
Yes, with pleasure. I have been following and admiring Lynn's work for a very long time, and when we started working on that exhibition about 2 years ago, in 2014 or end of 2014, she had the big retrospective at the ZKM, the Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe. And we were discussing that we wanted to do something on her current engagement with biotechnologies. So maybe Lynn, maybe you want, I will explain later the exhibition, but maybe you want to start saying what got you interested in biotechnologies and their impact on society and us.
Well, I had done a few projects prior to this, one was called Women Art Revolution, which was a history that had not been erased, but had never been actually recorded of the feminist movement in the United States, which I think made a difference because it was the first time that story had been told. And they also did a film that maybe was more pertinent called Strange Culture about Steve Kurtz, and the film who was arrested for bioterrorism for doing work that dealt with labs and biology. And the film, as Steve will tell you and many other people will tell you, got him released from a 23-year prison sentence. So I thought, well, what are the conditions now going on that are pivotal to our lives and to the planetary position? And I realized that programming the genome was really the major event of the century, because it really revised how we think about life, how we think about identity, what our future is, and what the choices are. So that's how I began to learn about really the ramifications and all the various organics that were part of this.
Then, of course, when we worked on the exhibition, Lynn rightly said, when we do a show about biotechnologies in Basel, we have to connect to the big pharmaceutical companies. Hoffmann La Roche has their headquarters here. Novartis has their headquarters in Basel. So it was crucial for us to get in touch with them. First, it was the idea to conduct some interviews, meet the scientists to learn about their research, but then a fantastic scientific, artistic collaboration happened. And the first image you see here is part of this, because Novartis created for Lynn an antibody that is bearing her name, Lynn Hershman, in its molecular structure. And they actually built it, they tested it for 3 months, and they helped us display it in various forms. Maybe, Lynn, you want to add what it meant for you? Because, of course, a very important part of Lynn's work is dealing with the notion of identity, and now having this incorporated your name in an antibody in a biological form is something really special.
Well, it not only made the antibody named after me, but one named after Roberta, which was a fictional character that existed for a decade in the 70s. And to me, the idea of antibody and outside of the body, but something that actually goes in the body. And antibodies are things that, when ingested, can locate toxins within the body and cure them, or at least make you aware of where they are and strengthen your immune system. And I think really that's what art does, because I think art searches culture and finds things that are toxic in it or need to be exposed in different ways, and focuses on those issues and brings them forward. So there's that kind of relationship. What was funny about this was that the Lynn Hershman antibody bonded with everything, and Roberta bonded with nothing. So they're going to keep the Roberta antibody and use it in their future. In fact, they already had a request for it, I think. Yeah. From Asia.
So yeah, when we maybe go to the next image, that's actually quite nice because it's the entry situation. The whole installation is titled Infinity Engine, and it's a multiple room installation existing by 8 rooms, and you are sort of invited to enter the exhibition as through a lab door, so quasi being in the lab, going behind the usually closed doors of the scientific research to learn more about these technologies that will so fundamentally change our lives in the next decades. And for me as a curator, this was what was so fascinating, that Lynn always has been sort of on the forefront on technological developments, was doing the first interactive video disc already in 1984, then dealing with the issue of artificial intelligence already in the 90s, and now looking how life will be fundamentally altered through the possibilities of biotechnologies, regenerative medicine, but also genome editing and so on. Maybe we can just go through them a little bit more.
The colors on the walls are the color of DNA itself. That's why we did that. And also, when you enter, you're going towards an exit. You're going down a hallway that mirrors you as an infinite being, but towards the exit of the world that we used to know.
So here you see the oops. No, okay, so the various rooms were dealing with these advances in the biotechnologies, bioprinting, for example, that now laboratory-grown organs can be transplanted. Then a very important room was dedicated to genome editing, how the CRISPR-Cas9 technology has made that available to a wide public, actually. And here you see the heart and nucleus of the exhibition. On the left side, you see the actual antibody that Novartis has built for Lynn and has researched on. And on the right side, you see the DNA, because that was the essence of the show, very important. It's the first DNA-based artwork. The whole exhibition, everything you have seen, the prints, the videos, the wallpaper, everything has been transferred into DNA. Because since a couple of years, scientists are able to put binary digital code, the zeros and ones, into biological code, the base of the DNA. So that's really, again, very revolutionary. And as you can see here, it's presented as a religious relic, or you could also say, you don't see the lab door here, but it's also behind a closed lab door. So you can just sneak into also reference, you mentioned that yourself, to Marcel Duchamp and État Donné. Would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Well, it's really a closed lab door that you could look into, and the reference was Duchamp's piece that you looked into but couldn't enter. Of course, we are all in it anyway, and also kind of the blue light, the Yves Klein reference towards the void. So both of those played something in what it is. And to me, the final essence of what this 12-year project really is this, that it all goes into that almost a haiku of what life is.
I just love listening to how you speak about this. Speaking of haiku, we wanted to talk about the poetics of art, because as you told me, Sabine, and you also told me, a lot of exhibition visitors come out and they question whether this is art. Some of the methods used in the exhibition are literal. I put on my coat and I literally play a scientist. So it's not something that in the West, in Western modernism, with its a desire for abstraction and alienation, would easily call art something as literal as that. But then at the same time, of course, we also learn a lot through this very literal method of presentation. You do have a sheet in the beginning of the exhibition where you explain some of these scientific terms like CRISPR and so on. And so here I wanted to talk about the need to educate your audience in order to empower them through this knowledge to know about these technologies and to understand the present, which might look futuristic. It is not, it's happening right here. So as a curator and as an artist, how do you struggle between the poetics of art and also the need to educate your audiences about this very mind-blowing information?
If I start, well, for us it was very important that the audience understands what is going on. So we prepared a lot of material. We have translated all the videos also into German for our local audience. But I think it's also many, and maybe you will expand, Lynn, many transformative processes are taking place. The material is not displayed the way it would be displayed by science. So it's always that twist, that artistic twist, to bring it into a new context. And but of course, a very important idea is also, as I said, that you enter the lab door and you understand what these technologies are, because as you said, it looks like the future, and a lot of people I've guided through have been amazed that this is possible, and this is no longer science fiction but reality.
And I think that you subliminally understand it. The museum was divided into 8 rooms, and an 8 on its side is infinity, and it also is the structure for DNA. So you're feeling that in your lab coat as you're walking through, in a sense, performing the history of what this new field is by learning about it, or just by going through the rooms. You know, it's not a science exhibit. It's something that hopefully will give some sort of relevance and resonance to what the deepest possibilities are at this moment. And truly, we could not have finished this work or even made it a year ago, because the process of conversion to DNA was only begun and was only able to do within the last year. So it's, I think, a highly relevant to today understanding of where we're going as a species and where we're going as a planet and what the possibilities are.
So you also wanted to talk about the consequences of what we're doing now. Maybe this is a good moment to talk about that. I mean, you are partly also an activist. So through your exhibitions, you educate your audience to think more carefully about the consequences of what we're doing right now.
Well, I think that there are consequences and unintentioned consequences, and perhaps the motivation is utopian to perhaps do something that will extend life on the planet and to depollute the planet. For instance, you have wallpaper of new species that are being born every day that will then regenerate themselves. So they'll therefore have to be banks of origins. So the original lemon and the original apple that we used to know will have to be saved because there's so many mutations of them. And the metaphor there is that really we're wallpapering the planet with all sorts of new forms, new living forms. Or we have a bioprinter that is really, I think, an extension of photography, but that uses cartridge and really uses almost a photographic process in order to create a 3D pulsating living organ rather than a 3D model that can come out of a very similar system. So I think that we think we know what we're doing, or scientists have utopian visions of what they want to explore, but the unintended consequences is that we don't really know. And it depends upon, the greed of corporations and pharmaceutical companies as to who controls this and why and what they want, what will eventually happen from them. And also the unintentional consequences of, for instance, operating with an epigenetic scar on an unborn baby to correct things where you won't know for 20 or 30 years what that will do because it's never been done before. So therefore, I think we have to operate with optimistic caution to redirect our future in one that I think is one that for quality survival.
I think that the show really is critical in showing us that technology per se is never neutral, because it can either used for example, the 3D printer can be used to print an organ for a person who needs it for a transplant, but it can also print a weapon. So it's us, how we use it, and I think that's shown very well in the exhibition.
And I think also this ambivalence that you open up and the responsibility you transfer onto the viewer in creating these questions about ethics and what would I do and so on and so forth, just adds to the fact that you're really you're like a Leonardo da Vinci Renaissance artist, woman artist, rather than an artist in the classical sense. I'm sure we all agree. And you say in your interviews that you have but you have always felt like an outsider. You never belonged to the conceptual artist or the performative group or any of that. And just in order to ground some of these ideas that some of you might feel a bit overwhelmed by, like myself, I wanted to go back to the beginnings and just have you talk a little bit about the context of San Francisco, Silicon Valley, the 60s. Timothy Leary plays Sims in Conceiving Alza. I mean, you were part of that counterculture of the 60s and that went into the 70s. You met many important people, political and poetic and scientific nature. So I think, this growing up in this kind of atmosphere partly also created your interest and created the kind of artist that you are now. Would it have been different if you'd grown up in New York? I think so, because the thinking is very different in New York at the time.
Well, I think it would have been different if I grew up, but I try not to do that. And I think also being an outsider, I found is really an advantage. Just like being discovered at my time of life has been an advantage because it gives you a lot of freedom. Because you're able to witness things without actually being immersed in it, and sometimes you could see things clearer from that distance. But most certainly being in the Bay Area where people really breathe the digital culture and the effect that it's going to have. I mean, in Los Angeles, people breathe scripts, but in the Bay Area, you breathe programming, and you just anticipate things that are about to happen or that could happen, even if they haven't happened yet. So it's been a really vital and ripe place to live, and rife with people who are taking chances. And I do think that being in Berkeley in the 60s and being, as they say, vaccinated with the ability to understand, that one had no voice at that point, and that one could find a voice, and that one could be autonomous, and the responsibility with finding a voice to reconstruct the politics of the perspective of the era that they're working with. And so these are elements that would never have happened had I had a comfortable life or lived in New York.
It's interesting what you say about voice, because you said that the free speech movement influenced you a lot, but also you came to technology through sound in the breathing machines. You made wax, I think I have a slide, you made wax masks of yourself, and then you combined them with breathing sound, which was one of the reasons why they were taken out of a museum exhibition, because then it was said that sound is not art or technology is not art, and they took them out. But then we continue into the first person plural, where you find a voice through technology again, and so on and so on. It's also like a DNA or red thread that runs through your work, also your film work. Ada, in a very important scene, says, there's someone in front of me who actually hears what I say, So I don't know if this is a question or you want to say something, but there's a relationship with technology, breathing, and voice, and literally giving birth to the artwork. Could you say something about that?
Sure. Again, the most potent parts of my life happened on the cusp of some sort of a disaster. So I was pregnant at 21, and I went into heart failure and wasn't expected to live even throughout the pregnancy, but beyond that, for 6 months would be the maximum. And during that time, under an oxygen tent, where you weren't able to do anything, all you could hear was your breath. And the breath became so important. And also at that same time I was learning to do these wax casts. So afterwards, when I willed myself out of that desperate position, I added sound to the pieces, not knowing that nobody had done this, because it seemed like such a natural thing to do. Sound to me was a way of having something move and draw and extend a breath into an environment. So I did that, and the first talking piece I did was a few years later. I think it's around 1968, where I did a self-portrait as another person, which is the piece on your right. And it was me as a black woman talking to people who would come up to them using old-fashioned sensors and old-fashioned tapes about what their life was like. And I put that in an exhibition that was supposed to be about drawing, because it seemed to me this incorporated the sound going out into the waves of the air was a type of drawing. But the museum didn't feel that, and they took it down because they said media wasn't art. Now, I don't know whether it was a woman talking that got them upset or a black woman talking that got them upset. But regardless, they closed the show, which turned into the idea that I could work in hotel rooms and work wherever I wanted to. And it was a kind of a gift, because you just looked around at what the other possibilities of freedom and truly free speech offered, if you're just open to seeing what else existed beyond that kind of exclusivity of what was considered an appropriate viewing room.
Let me see how are we doing for time? Someone's doing this, which means shut up, Maxa. So, Q&A? We have 10 minutes? Okay, oh great, okay, good. Having said that, being thrown out of the museum has invited you back in many, many years later with your first big retrospective at ZKM in Karlsruhe, which was organized by Peter Weibel, the theorist, artist, performance artist, video artist from Austria. You showed over 700 pieces in this work, and I think your exhibition is a continuation of that. So.
Yeah, we took the project, the Infinity Engine, that came sort of full circle and is really finished now with the show in Basel, took its origin in that exhibition. So the first 3 rooms of the 8 that we are exhibiting originated at the ZKM and were also commissioned, right?
There's a commission to go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I should say also that even though there were 702 works in that exhibition, and that I have about 3,000 and 3,400 in San Francisco in storage beyond that it was the first time the works were ever shown. Almost 65% of them had never been seen, because people told me over the years that they weren't art. I mean, that was the consistent rhythm that went through when I showed what I thought was my most important work. People would say it wasn't art because nobody had done it, so there was no name and no reference to it. But when I was able to show it finally, and when people were able to see that it would fill a room even of these never before seen works, people say, oh, that was before Paul Tech, and that was before X and Y. And so therefore it gained in those, just a few years ago, the historical reference that had been lacking because it had no voice. It had been omitted from history. So don't throw anything away. It's a lesson.
The show at ZKM is such a substantial review of Lynn's work from the early beginnings, and I really think this exhibition triggered a lot of rediscovery of her work over the recent years.
Just not rediscovery.
Not rediscovery, discovery, okay.
Well, it's also interesting that it was curated by Peter Weibel. You know, you'd expect a young curator rediscovering you, but it's Peter Weibel who's been following you for a long, long, long time, I guess.
He didn't know about this work because nobody, I would take something from a closet, from under a bed, and kind of send it as a joke, and they said, we want to put that in. I had an assistant that worked for me for 7 years, and she said, where was all that work? I never saw it. And it was cardboard boxes. So.
Because a lot of people say, make references between you and Cindy Sherman, Laurie Simmons, I guess, to kind of get some bearing, of where you're coming from. But I would actually say that the only artist that I can really think of as a reference is Sturtevant, because she was always outside of, the art scene, with a capital A, and she did very, very early copying Andy Warhol's work. She's very interdisciplinary, and at the same time also, refused to be boxed up or categorized. That's on the level of art, but on the level of filmmaking, you told me that you also didn't have a lot of references to go to. You never went to film school, but you were friends with the Coppolas.
Well, Eleanor Coppola and I were in the same carpool, so and consequently she had screenings every night. That became my education, and that actually was how I started to make films, because it didn't look all that hard they were doing. So that's how it all began.
And yes, sorry.
Maybe that's also something interesting to mention, that of course with the exhibition at HEC we also tried to show Lynn as an artist and a filmmaker. So we have the Infinity Engine with its 8 rooms on the one hand, but then also a strange culture of film, and you mentioned it. It was sort of the beginning also of your investigation of biotechnologies to also show her practice as a filmmaker.
But again, it was an advantage to not know what I was doing, because when we opened with Strange Culture at Sundance, and Variety said she broke the fourth wall, and I had to ask Ruby Rich what the fourth wall was, because, had I known that you weren't supposed to do that, I might not have. So again.
And can you talk a little bit about your latest film? No, you can't. That's the secret to be kept until in 2 years' time. 2 years,
when you show it here.
For this. I'm already so excited. All right, so maybe we'll take questions for the audience, unless Sabine, there's anything really, really urgent you want to say at this point.
Come and see the exhibition.
Let's see. I'm sure we have questions in the audience. There's one here, Marianne.
Thank you. This might be a very banal question about process, Lynn, but I'm wondering, specifically the short film that you showed last night, yes, the Vertigo film. I wanted to ask specifically about that, about your process, but also generally with the exhibit and all your work. Specifically about the film last night, I was thinking that there are all the Vertigo references, but then there was the story of the Modigliani painting. And I was wondering, when I saw it last night, did you have all that information when you started the film, or did you find that out later? So how your process in making that film, but also in a lot of your work, you talk about the exhibit. It was only last year that this DNA stuff became out. Obviously, you were working on these things before then. So I'm just asking about process, if you sort of let things filter into your head and then eventually things come out, or do you start with like very specific ideas and other things flow into them? If you could just talk about that.
I might have a slide, actually, which might help you. Can I have the slides back? I have a slide from Vertigo that might help the concept. Yeah.
So with Vertigo, I was invited, actually, because of the show in Germany, to do something in San Francisco. And the only restraint was it had to have something to do with the collection of the museum, and it happened to be the museum that Vertigo was shot in. So I thought, how lucky, to be able to do that. And they were interested in having me to redo that in the original space, that Hitchcock used and we found all the same lighting, the same camera conditions, the same cars and so forth in order to do that. But then you start to think, well, what's Vertigo about? And, it's about questioning authenticity and identity. And so I was interested in kind of the hidden scars of the museum that might have some reference to this. And therefore, I interviewed the conservation department and found the story of the Modigliani. And so that's how that evolved, was to combine that mistaken identity of a Modigliani that lived in a closet for 30 years and the character from Vertigo, and also all the people who played Madeline in the film that we put together. So I think it's a process of questioning a premise. If you start out, say, in 2006 to say, well, what is happening with genetic engineering, and then one by one you learn about it, and by the time you finish the film, with this installation, when we were able finally to convert everything in the exhibition into DNA, which only happened maybe 6 weeks before the exhibition, I thought, this is where this particular inquiry ends. And I think the ambiguity of not knowing can be an advantage because it leaves you open to see these possibilities of exploration. So you have to know when to stop.
Just for clarification, can you briefly explain to us how one converts an exhibition into DNA?
Me? Well, you put everything on a video timeline. It's very simple. That's why I think that this exhibition is really a form of expanded cinema, because you have a timeline and you put on a video frame everything that's in the exhibition, including the video or the digital posters or the files. And then you take that, and there's only 2 places in the United States that now can do this conversion. One of them is San Francisco, and I was introduced to them by the man who actually invented the process, George Church, who's in the exhibition. So he helped me along the way and talked to them and helped me to get it done. I was lucky that Twist Biology's owner's brother had been a sculptor, so he was interested in doing this and helping me to do it. So a lot of it is luck and chance.
All right, but after the video timeline?
After the video timeline, I give
what
it to
happens?
them. and they convert the video frames into the biological structure of DNA, and then they do the opposite to pull it back, and it has a 1,000,000-year lifespan. So.
And the biological structure is held in some kind of liquid. What is it?
Crystal.
Is it crystal?
Yeah. Invisible.
Oh.
Yeah.
Too much. Invisible. Of course it would be.
Yeah. But Technicolor and Microsoft are doing it, and they're heavily invested in doing this. And the Montreux Jazz Festival just put their entire archive into DNA. So,
and I think it would be a technology really, which will be widely used in the future. Now it's still quite expensive to do it, but we have to think of, our growth of data is growing exponentially. So this data is not in the cloud, it's somewhere in a data center that needs cooling systems that are quite expensive, that are growing, so we have to find better ways of doing that. And just to give you an idea, 1 gram of a DNA can store 215 petabytes of data, and 1 petabyte is 1 and 16 zeros after the 1. So to give you an idea, the whole the archive of the Montreux Jazz Festival, which is enormous, is, let's say, probably half a sugar cube.
I'm sure there are more questions. Yes, there's one in the way back, right in front of Annelie. We can switch off the slides.
Hi. So my question is about how the DNA that the information is stored in is then extracted. I mean, presumably it would be injected into some kind of host that would then interpret the information. Is that right? Or can it be read under a microscope? I mean,
It can be read under a microscope, and in fact, George Church, who both invented CRISPR technology as well as this technology, says sometimes he performs things that are in DNA, and also screens directly from the DNA.
if it was injected into a host, would that? I mean, let's say you had a bit of DNA injected into your arm, then say, would you be able to access that information? Is it that bizarre? I mean, are we at that point?
It's already there. The DNA is already in your arm. So, no, I mean that is. I don't think you need to do that. I think there are ways to store the information in DNA that could be read just from that storage, without the injection would introduce all kinds of pollutants to it.
Right. Okay.
Hello, thank you. My question is how then we can read this DNA. You know, if you put like this show, how can you then get back to the data from the DNA?
You mean, how do you extract information from DNA once it's there?
Yes.
The same way you put it in. So you just perform that backwards, and extract it in that way. Although George Church says that he can, as I say, project things directly from DNA, and he said it's not that difficult to do it.
I think maybe to add, when you understand, like DNA is biological code, right? So it's the 4 base of the DNA, and then to understand what digital code is. In principle, it's zeros and ones. That's the machine language, and then we wrote software to make it accessible for us to understand. So it's it always needs sort of a transformation and a translation.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment. I'm a physician, and my son dragged me to Art Basel, and I just came here for some information, just to be inspired, and I just wanted to tell you, thank you very much. I am inspired, and I'm especially inspired by the intersection of science and art, and science and creativity, and what you just said, which was because nothing was, or anything that I wanted to do wasn't there, that was a gift of freedom and of creativity. And I just wanted to, again, thank you in saying that I will remember this sentence, and it will be translated, not via DNA though, into my world and into my care and what I do. So it was a great talk, very unexpected. Thank you.
And I think that people have to look at the languages of their own time, and this, the ability to use software and to mine data and to use artificial intelligence and now to use antibodies and DNA are the materials of our time. And as an artist, you can't be restricted whatsoever. Use all of that in order to tell the story of your own time.
Maybe I would like to bring attention to one image that you might have seen in the background of the show, a video installation called Double Syringe by Lynn, which connects also to the first quote from Ada Lovelace, Tilda Swinton that we heard. The exhibition is also about that now through the modern life sciences, we can create life. And it's this piece is a beautiful reference to the famous fresco in the Sixtine Chapel by Michelangelo, where God's finger is touching man and creating human life. And there you see that through the biotechnologies, we can actually create life. And all the information and works in the exhibition illustrate that.
I can try and pull it up. Should I pull it up? Yeah, it's on the slides. Okay. Yeah, I'll try and pull it up so you know what we're talking about. But I have to run through this. Sorry, close your eyes and I'll tell you when to open them. It was? Yeah. It was already there? Okay, but I can't go back here. I don't know why. You go? Yes, thank you. And back 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 and a little. Yeah. Yes, that one. Yeah. This is the Michelangelo reference. Yes, of the Sixtine Chapel of Adam and God meeting almost. Yeah.
We saw a little bit of Antibody, your exhibition, and I had to ask, I saw the jellyfish cat. Can you just explain that? Because she really wants to get one.
That was created by the Mayo Clinic in 2011, and the reason that it was the jellyfish gene was put in with the feline, with the cat, was because they had similar structures to humans in some ways, and they were able to track the HIV virus through the cat to find out where it was, what its structure was, and therefore this helped to create a cure. At least in scientific circles, there is a reason why these combinations happen. However, now with CRISPR technology being so readily available on just a flash drive, anybody can use it, and there may not be the same kind of moral inquisition as to why they're being used in that way.
Hello. You talked about like binary language, and I was recently reading Cairo's text for One Voice, where they were talking about how Plato and Socrates actually were using mathematical language and thinking about, and if we look back to the ancient forms of language, mathematics was actually an important part of the thinking back then. So it's interesting now that we're going into this new phase where mathematical structures are so present within our society.
Well, Tom Stoppard, who's a well-known playwright, uses mathematical structures in the creation of his plays. So people are doing that crossover in many media.
Hey there. Is it on? Hello? Hey there.
We have one.
Hey. Congratulations on the new work, Lynn. It's really beautiful. I want to ask, though, because you were talking about your early career and the stuff that kind of was never seen until, the market kind of took notice. And it's so awesome to see your work everywhere now. But I'm curious, those other pioneers, maybe the other women that were working alongside you in those early generations who don't yet have that visibility, if you could share some of the, most influential folks that were working alongside you.
Well, I think you have to see Women Art Revolution, and maybe we could screen it here because that tells that history in the voices of the 65 women who were interviewed for it.
For sure, I'll program it next year. Yeah. I made a promise, I'll stick to it.
But there were many women who were who used their situation to activate their own culture using humor, as did the Guerrilla Girls, and using activism to address real issues in a time of that celebrated minimalism. I can say that much.
I like to give my audience time, because, it takes time to think of a question, but I wonder if we've really exhausted you. Yes, I know.
Hi, Lynn. I was, of course, fascinated by the idea that a gram of DNA has, petabytes of information. So I'm wondering, what is in that little thing that you exhibit? It's obviously a lot more than 1 gram.
I had to reduce the exhibition to 20 milligrams. So everything that is in the exhibition, it's in low resolution. The reason I had to reduce it was because that's all I could afford. Now, Microsoft and Technicolor could afford $20,000 a second to do it in full resolution, and one can. But that's why. So I took everything on a video timeline and reduced it to 20 megs, and that's what was transferred. But it included everything.
I just wanted to ask where do you see the direction of your work going now, or do you have to sort of wait for the technology to catch up with your vision?
I really deal with themes and philosophical themes, and I will be doing the end of the trilogy of the Ada Technolust, and the next one is called CRISPR Fever, and hopefully that film will be done next year. I'm going to also do the last sequence of a film I started in 1984 called The Electronic Diary, and I think I just need time to think, to recover my brain, and not have any real secure plans, and really revise, fill the well in a sense. So beyond those two, I don't know.
Right, I get the signs. So that's a good note to end on, because we will all be waiting for the next moves. You will take us beyond what we know now in your future work, I'm sure. Thank you very much for coming, Lynn. Thank you very much, Sabine, for joining us. Thank you very much.